Before I read the gospel, I want to welcome those who are watching or participating through the internet. This is the Tri-County Cooperative Ministry. We are at Zion Lutheran Church in Moulton, and we welcome you to our service. Tri-County is part of a 5-church parish that consists of Zion here in Moulton, Zion in Sublime, Faith in Weimar, St. Peter in Prairie Valley, and Evangelical in Whittier. Pastor Herb Byard is the senior pastor. My name is John Hunsicker. I'm one of the supplies. The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "In those days after that suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then we'll see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the 4 winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things take place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these words have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be aware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Be seated. Now I know this never happens to any of you, but there was a woman that came to church on the first Sunday of Advent, and during the sermon, her mind began to wander. As I said, I know that never happens to any of you, especially when I'm preaching, right? Yeah, right, okay. Anyhow, her mind was wandering, and she was thinking about the shopping that she needs to do. She thought about the church programs and the parties that she needed to attend, and beginning to think about the dates when they were going to happen, and thought, well, I better start putting them on my calendar. And if she was really going to get ham for Christmas dinner, she wanted to get one that was good, and so she would get to talk to her butcher first. And as time went on, she was actually consumed with thinking about all the things that were going to be happening in the coming weeks. She thought about the party dress that was still at the cleaners that she needed to pick up, the decorations that were still in the attic that needed to be gotten down and put up. She thought about her children, the fact that they needed haircuts. Then she remembered the carpets that needed to be shampooed before she was going to have her open house. And if she wanted good seats at the community theater's presentation of A Christmas Carol, she better call on Monday and get the tickets. The thoughts and worries just started flowing in her head, as you know happens. And when a woman stepped up to the lectern and began reading the New Testament lesson, she read something about dates and times and how the day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night. The woman knew all about that because Christmas has a way of sneaking up on us, something like a thief in the night. Well, does any of that thought process begin to resonate with you? Thinking about all the stuff that needs to be done. Granted, these times are very busy, but this year, with the way things are going, maybe they're more busy or less busy, depending, because we've got to figure out how to work around all the stuff that's going on. And remember what happened in Thanksgiving. Maybe you're even at this point kind of grieving the loss of things that you would like to do during Christmas that just isn't going to happen because of everything that's happened here. Well, I have a feeling that Advent may be very different for us. Maybe Advent, however, will give us the opportunity to prepare for the celebration of Christmas in a new way. After all, that's what the season is all about, preparation. It's the time to look to the future and to look to the past. Perhaps there will be less business that we have to do, busyness rather, than we have to get involved with. And maybe we can take more time to look forward to that portion of Advent message which is about Christ coming again in the future. Christ coming in a new way, even as we think about the Christ coming to be born again in Bethlehem in a manger. And that's kind of what Advent's supposed to do. It's to prepare us for the celebration of Christmas, but also to prepare us for the coming again of Christ at the end of time. And today's gospel reading centers around that point. When Jesus ascended into heaven, one of the things he promised his apostles is that he would come back. And of course their question, and the question that's been asked ever since, is, so what, when? But the word from Jesus is simply to keep alert. We don't know when he's coming back to set up his kingdom. Nobody does. After all, as he put it, about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Even Jesus himself didn't know the day or the time that he would come back. Only God the Father knows that. And so Jesus didn't want his disciples, his apostles, the followers of him, to spend time speculating, looking at time channels and different things that lead to a time when it would come again. But just forget about that, because they had things to do. And his parable reinforced that point. He told about a man that was going on a long trip, and since he was going to be gone for a while, he couldn't say when he'd come back. It might be 10 days, or 10 weeks, or 10 months, or maybe even 10 years. He didn't know. But when he did come back, he expected to find things just the way they were supposed to be. Everything was supposed to be in order. And one servant was given the job of being the doorkeeper. It was his job to keep watch for the master. And since the doorkeeper didn't know when the master was going to return, he literally had to simply stay awake, stay alert. He had to watch. He could not allow himself to become involved in other things. We get the impression that if the master returned and found the doorkeeper asleep or not paying attention, that person would be in serious trouble. But so it is with we who serve Christ. We don't know the hour, but we need to be ready. Now, I've been to the southwest coast of Italy, where you can visit the ancient city of Pompeii. It's close to Mount Vesuvius. And that volcano erupted the last time in 1691 and killed 18,000 people. But you've probably heard about the most famous eruption, which occurred in 79 AD. Not only was Pompeii destroyed, but a number of other cities like Heraclion were also destroyed as well. And I've been to Pompeii, and the interesting thing about Pompeii that it was covered with ash at the rate of 6 inches per hour. If you can imagine dirt falling from the sky at 6 inches per hour. And in 17 hours, the city was buried under 9 feet of ash and pumice and stone. And for 1,700 years, Pompeii was literally buried under those tons of cinders and ashes and stone. Over time, archaeologists have uncovered the city and found the remains of bodies. And what's interesting is you can actually find what looks like a body, exactly the way it was. They have one person that's laying out in a covered thing that you can see that he's laying and his arms are kind of like this. He's laying flat. And so they found these bodies in different places. Some are buried in deep vaults, as if they were kind of getting to a place that we might call like a bomb shelter. And others were found in a rich person's home. And I read where they also found a guard, a watchman, who was still at the gate of the city. His hands were basically still on his weapon. His mission was to watch. And even during the eruptions, he stayed at his post. And maybe that's what Jesus is telling us too. We need to be alert. We need to be vigilant. We need to be watchful, waiting for Christ's kingdom to come. Of course, a good question is, why did it take so long? Maybe the delay is to give us more time to prepare. When we look around us and listen to the news every day, that we see violence and tragedy and we see evil and all this kind of nasty stuff going around us, we ask the question, why doesn't Jesus come and put an end to all this stuff? And that's the question that's been asked over and over by literally every generation of Christians since the time of Jesus. And the early Christians that were gathering in Mark's church came to listen to the words about Jesus that Mark had written down so that they would remember it. And they were experiencing some terrible and unthinkable things too. It was a time of crisis for them. Jerusalem, the temple, had been destroyed. There were people claiming to be the Messiah. And if you remember, Jesus had even warned his followers that there would be these pretenders coming along. In addition, there were those who had calculated at the time when Jesus would come back. And as you can imagine, it's a very confusing time. Mark records these words from Jesus. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from the heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. In other words, that day when it comes, you don't have to worry about missing it, because everyone will recognize it. The question for us is, will we be ready? The Son of Man is coming in the clouds with great power and glory, Jesus reminds us. A mother and author in England wrote about kind of an analogy of what Jesus was talking about. She writes that when her children were young, and the floor in their playroom upstairs would suddenly get littered with toys and all kinds of stuff. You know, nobody puts anything away, you just get more out. The way that she would get the children to clean up would be to say sometimes that she was going to go around the corner to shop for a few things. And when I come back, she warned, everything should be in its place. And then she would give the children different tasks to do. The oldest ones would get more complicated things, the youngest one would get the easier things to do. And then she would simply leave. The children would either do as she said, or they'd ignore it and keep doing what they wanted to do. When she got back, sometimes she would be able to open the door quietly and sneak upstairs and look through the half-open door into the room and see what was going on, see if they had done their job, if they were kind of doing their own thing. Then there were other times when she would sneak up and she would see that they were not quite finished and they needed a little more time. And so she'd kind of sneak out and do something for a few minutes and then come back in. And sometimes when they were pretty close to being finished, she would go downstairs again quietly and slam the front door, at which time the children would usually yell, "We're not yet finished, Mommy, give us a little bit longer." And her conclusion to all this was that each Advent, I recall these experiences with my children and wonder how many times the Lord has been close at hand, seeing the chaos in our world and longing to come, but waiting us, sparing us a little judgment a little bit longer. Maybe the Lord's just giving us time to put our lives together. But you know, the good news is that we don't have to wait until Christ comes back to be part of Christ's kingdom. I don't think Jesus is trying to scare people. I think instead, he's trying to comfort us. Because we know how the story ends. We've been to the Easter services. We need to learn the lesson of the fig tree. When you look at the fig tree, you can tell that it will produce fruit eventually. When its branches become tender, Jesus said, and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you will know that he is near at the very gates. But actually, Jesus is with us all the time. It's like the story of a missionary in South America. He was right out of seminary, just newly married, and he decided that he and his wife didn't exactly want to be in the most primitive of places, especially his young wife. And so he took along a generator with him. He took a generator and some gas because this would help. The generator would at least give them light at night. The native people saw the generator and didn't understand it. To some of them, it was just a machine that made a lot of noise and gave off some smoke. Some of the natives even thought with all that noise and smoke there was a demon in it. In the middle of December, as again the nights were getting longer, he wired their house with lights and even set up a Christmas tree, a small one, with some twinkling lights in it. Many of the local people would travel quite a distance to see this light and to see the Christmas tree blinking. The missionary also hung a light eventually in the middle of the church so that the people would have some light at the end of the day. And then many times at the end of the day they would gather at the church and sing some songs before they went home. He tried to tell them in the process how the power went through from the generator, through the wires, to the lights to turn them on. But it didn't quite sink in. They didn't understand it. On Christmas Eve, as the people gathered to worship, he again turned on the light bulb and heard the usual ohs and ahs of the people when it came on. As he stood at the door, then at the end of the service, one of the men who had the hardest time understanding about electricity shook his head and said, "Now I see what Christmas is all about. We are light bulbs, and Christmas sends us the power to light us up." And that's a pretty good explanation, isn't it? Even though Christ promised that he would return and bring in his kingdom, we really don't have to wait until then to connect with him. He's available to us now, but we still have to be alert. Just because Jesus hasn't come back yet doesn't mean that he's not coming back. He's giving us time to get our lives together. Let us pray. Stir up your power, Lord Christ, and come. Come into our lives in a new way and give us the ability